This video is sponsored by Foldforge. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated army lists from the past weekend of competitive play, talk about what's currently winning the game. And this is an exciting weekend because it is starting to see a reopening of competition after the holidays. We've had a smattering of events over the last couple of weekends, however, nothing really big to sink our teeth into. This weekend, however, we do see our first major of the new format. That said, it is New Year's weekend, so there were still a limited number of events, and so I actually delved into some smaller events that I wouldn't normally have covered on this series, events that were sub 20 players but ran 5 rounds to a single undefeated. And with that, let's dive in and talk about these lists in a metagame breakdown. Ultramarines, kind of unsurprisingly, take their place at the upper end of the metagame with one win at the XPZ Presents the Iron Gauntlet, as well as domination from the Glass City Grand Tournament, taking down 2 of the 3 undefeated slots from that 100-player major. That Iron Gauntlet tournament is interesting in that it was an Ironman event, meaning that it ran all 5 of its games over the course of one day. That's an absolutely grueling format and does tend to favor mechanically less complex armies, which I would tend to exclude Ultramarines from. They are incredibly strong on their data sheets, but it does take a long time and a lot of energy to resolve attack activations from a lot of Ultramarine archetypes. And so it is fascinating that this army was able to take down that style of event. Blood Angels actually come out with 2 undefeated results at the Midgard January GT as well as Saffron Slam 13. Both of those using the new Rage Cursed Onslaught detachment. Drukhari looking pretty good with the win at that big major, the Glass City GT. Aeldari winning the New Year New Grudge, with a fascinating Psyker-based list. Grey Knights took down the New Year's Iron Man GT. That's another one-day 5-round GT. This time with a pretty straightforward list. Grey Knights can be complex, but they also have limited activations, and so they do tend to operate pretty quickly. Thousand Suns won the ProCon Golden Ticket No Not That One GT, and the DEF CON 2026 event ended in a natural draw. At the end, a 50-50 tie between Emperor's Children and Chaos Demons. An all Slaanesh matchup, by the way, since the Chaos Demons are running kind of idiosyncratically Legion of Excess, not a detachment that we have talked about in a really long time. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the exact lists that were used here just after a word from our sponsor. This video has been sponsored by the most impressive competitive terrain solution I've ever worked with, and that is Foldforge. Foldforge is a system of modular, disassemblable terrain features for Warhammer 40k and other tabletop miniature games. The system uses building walls that are printed in a high-resolution FDM printer, such that their components can fold and unfold, allowing for easy storage and quick assembly, with magnets that allow you to quickly assemble and disassemble. Using these folding wing tabs, they then lock together and create a robust terrain solution. The modular characteristic of these ruins allow them to flip from one side to another. So when you're playing something like a chapter-approved 2025 format, where depending on the deployment zone, the ruins may be flipped from one side to another, you can simply reassemble the structure on the fly in order to construct the second layout. This also means that most of these buildings can be linked together, which allows you to expand them out if you want more narrative play. On top of that, your Foldforge terrain set also comes in its own bespoke carry case. Each of the pieces has its own slot, so it's easy to remove from the case and repack back in. And with the ease of assembling the magnetized pieces, you can also set up an entire table in under 2 minutes. So say goodbye to overpacked closets and overflowing shelves, and say hello to Foldforge. Check them out in the links down in the video description to get your Foldforge today. So we'll start by talking about our metagame frontrunner, Ultramarines, and we'll move over to XPZ Presents the Iron Gauntlet, this being a one-day event that ran 5 rounds over the course of a single period. In this case, Jake Herod took that event down with an Ultramarine Gladius Task Force. Now, normally this is kind of standard fare for Ultramarines right now. Obviously, one of the strongest factions of the game, running one of the strongest detachments of the game, but Jake did take a couple of unique flares in this particular build. He started off with Barnia's Calgar, Star, the great man himself, in addition to a captain, just a standard captain, no special enhancements on him. That's to lead a second Victrix Honor Guard squad in lieu of any of the additional epic heroes. We also then had a combi weapon lieutenant, as well as a standard lieutenant. This is not the first time we're going to see a standard lieutenant this weekend, by the way, with the fire discipline enhancement. That's going to give him sustained hits 1, and under Devastator Doctrine, reroll advance rolls. Now, we're also running an intercessor squad for the backline, as well as an assault jump back intercessor squad for some utility, an incursor squad in order to help out some of the ranged attacks, because we do only have one Oath of Moment in this particular build. We're only running that single Victrix Honor Guard squad, a scout squad for the front line, as well as an impulsor to carry around one of those Victrix Honor Guard bricks. We are running 2 of them. One of them does have both the Ancient and the Banner in them, the 2 epic hero attachments, the other one just being all of the standard Victrix. Now, lastly is the attachment option for that lieutenant, which is a 10 model Hellblaster squad. There's no standard delivery system for the Hellblasters here. They're just going to be ground pounding up the table, or potentially coming in off strategic reserve off the side. But the nice benefit is that we do have kind of a full combo for these guys between the Incursor squad, the Hellblasters, and the attached lieutenant. With fire discipline, the lieutenant is granting them both lethal and sustained hits. You can target your Oath of Moment target, and if you shoot the target with Incursors to begin with, you actually get a huge statistical improvement if you fish for your critical results. So you're going to be hitting on 2s naturally. Any 6s that you roll are an additional hit, and as well as an automatic wound. So you basically just have pure upside for fishing for additional 6s. On average, you will get the same number of hits back, because any of your 6s you roll will offset any 1s that you roll, and those 6s will also just automatically wound you. So you can do sort of fire on these guys so they become AP 4, ignore cover, and then fire 20 times, rerolling everything after the Incursors shoot at your Oath of Moment target. And that gives you the opportunity to clip out an opposing enemy brick before you have to dedicate your Victrix Honor Guard. The other thing is that these guys are really good against other people's Victrix Honor Guard. The only way that they're saving is if they do have Marneus Galgar's guys inside their unit. Otherwise, you're going to be punching AP 4, which goes almost all the way through their armor save with ignore cover. So outside of Armor of Contempt, they're going to be saving on 6s. They can Armor of Contempt to save on 5s, but you're going to be handing them so many of those saves, because remember, with Oath of Moment, you're going to offset their -1 to wound, so you go back to wounding on 2s. So your unit is firing 20 shots, sustain plus lethal, wounding on 2s, putting them on a 6+, maybe if they burn a CP on a 5+ save, almost certain to punch through the Victrix Honor Guard squad and get to the characters inside in one activation. So in the context of the mirror match, this unit is actually incredibly powerful. From there, we are backing it up with some additional shooting. This is in the form of a pair of Gladiator Lancers to knock out enemy heavy tanks, as well as a Ballistus Dreadnought, another unit that, alongside the Incursors, potentially can operate without the need for Oath of Moment. Altogether, pretty interesting stuff. It's nice to see that we are seeing some concessions made to the potential mirror match against other Ultramarine players in this list, and obviously it clearly worked. Next up, let's talk about Blood Angels from the Saffron Slam 13, which was taken down by Thomas Wybrow. In this case, he was playing a Rage Cursed Onslaught detachment, the most popular detachment in the faction now after a couple weeks post the Grotsmis drop of this new way to play Blood Angels. And in this case, we're running some really interesting unit selections. Now, a lot of this list is going to be kind of standard Blood Angels Rage Cursed Onslaught fare. We're taking a Chaplain with a jump pack with Carmine Reliquary to give his unit a 6-inch scout, allowing that Death Company Marine squad that he's going to be hopping into to project a lot of threat with their advance and charge from the detachment, the strategy from the detachment, in order to impact really early in the game, threaten your opponent, and force them to either screen your scout and give you material to kill, or you're able to alpha strike them early. We also have a Captain with a jump pack with Master of the Red Thirst for a once per game fights first, and we do have several Sanguinary Guard squads that he can hop into. Interestingly, we're also running Commander Dante in here, as well as Lamarties, and the last 2 selections are really fascinating. It's a Bladeguard Ancient and a Lieutenant. Now, these guys can combo attach into a Bladeguard Veteran squad, giving them the natural ability to fall back, shoot, and charge. That's not something that the detachment can actually do naturally. So the lieutenant in here allows you to engage in prolonged combats a little bit more frequently. One big downside of Rage Cursed Onslaught is that it is very good on the charge, but if you don't kill your target on the charge and they remain in melee for multiple rounds, you lose your detachment ability and don't have a way to get it back because you don't have the ability to fall back and charge. The lieutenant obviously grants it to a big Bladeguard veteran squad. So we do have 6 Bladeguard veterans in the army. Beam, which can then attach with that guy, and then the Bladeguard Ancient gives them an increased OC value, +1 objective control, and also a once per game +1 attack. So we can get these Bladeguard veterans up to a potential 7 attacks per model if they charge in while battle shocked, or otherwise 6 attacks per model, but using that once per game plus the +1 attack naturally from the detachment ability. So this unit is actually very flexible. It is kind of slow, but it's high OC, so it's good for taking objectives in the late game. It's very flexible. It can engage in those multi-round combats, and it has 1,000,000 attacks. I do think the Bladeguard Ancient, for only a 45-point unit, anytime you have a solid combo with Bladeguard veterans, push that to its limit thanks to the bonus attacks from that unit. From there, we have an Assault Intercessor squad plus a standard Intercessor squad for some utility, 2 units of Assault Jump Back Intercessors for some additional utility. We have 2 10-model units of Death Company Marines. One of them is going to attach to Lamarty's. One of them is going to attach to that Scouting Chaplain, as well as a trio of Sanguinary Guard squads. We do have a Jump Pack Captain to jump into one of those. Commander Dante can join another one, and I think we just have another unit just to act as a trading piece that can go in and clear out lighter enemy units without having to worry about committing any expensive attached characters. So while we do see a lot of these standard inclusions from Rage Cursed Onslaught, which are all of these Death Company squads, all of these Jump Pack Infantry squads, and the Sanguinary Guard, the Bladeguard veterans are really an interesting and unique take in the detachment, and I do think, in a big way, solve one of the big problems that the detachment has, which is that inability to fall back and still charge. Obviously, they aren't a jump back unit. They're a little bit slower, and they can't really combo with a lot of the huge benefits that Blood Angels can grant with characters like Dante, for example. However, the Lieutenant attachment there is really cool. Now, moving on to the largest event of the weekend, this was the Glass City Grand Tournament, a 100-player major. It ended up being won by Ultramarines. We saw a couple of Ultramarine players top that one, but it ended up with Drukhari in the undefeated slot. I think second place based on tiebreakers. This was Folger Piles, former world champion, using a Spectacle of Spite detachment, the popular one based on witches and countercharging that we've been seeing doing extremely well over the course of the last couple of weeks. In this case, we were running Lady Malice, as well as Lilith Hesperax, and a single Succubus with Morgana's Curse. That'll increase the armor penetration and damage characteristics of her weapon by 1. That makes her good at sweeping a variety of infantry, including things like heavy infantry and Victrix Hunter Guard, because she doesn't care about any wound roll penalties, because she's just anti-infantry, which means she'll just naturally critical on 3-ups regardless. We're running 3 units of Witches in this case, as well as 3 Venoms, so we do have the opportunity to combat squad all of those Witches to a total of 6 units of 5. We also have a single Raider, where we can carry multiple Witch squads, in addition to an Incubi squad that's also in the list. Just 5 Incubi in that one, and that's likely an attachment for Lady Malice, where she can provide her leadership ability. We then have a Kronos for Pain Token Regeneration, a bunch of Hellions to act as the actual damage output, the counterpunch for this army. These guys do get pretty crazy once you start adding together the combination of combat drugs as well as their own empowerment ability to get additional attacks and strength on the charge. We have another unit of 5 Hellions, as well as a ton of Reaver jet bikes. 1 unit of 3 for utility, as well as 2 more units of 6. These were all running Heat Lances and Grav Talons, so we have access to 2 Grav Talons for that improved ability to deal mortal wounds when they fly over enemies, and the 2 Heat Lances to provide some serious anti-tank. Speaking of anti-tank, we're also running a pair of Dark Lance Heavy Weapon Scourge teams. These are 4 Dark Lances apiece, no Haywire Blasters to be found in this case, so that you don't run into those bad matchups where, unfortunately, the anti-vehicle properties of the Haywire Blasters don't work if your opponent's not running vehicles, or they are running all monsters instead of in place of vehicles. That the Dark Lances allow you a much more well-rounded list that's able to answer all of those threats. So we have a ton of these light vehicle embarked infantry units, in addition to a ton of those Hellion squads and jet bikes. So these fast, highly lethal units all over the table, compounded with that ability to countercharge the Witch squads into things that could potentially be trying to re-engage into these Drukhari units. Probably one of the most aggressive varieties of Spectacle of Spite that we've seen, especially since it trades a lot of the character damage output that we would often see from multiple Succubi for just more combat units, more large units of Hellions, more large units of Reavers, more so than I think we've seen in most of these varieties of this army. Now, moving on over to the 20 6-player Pro-Con Golden Ticket. No, not that one, GT. This one, I guess they named it the Golden Ticket GT, but it doesn't actually have a WCW Golden Ticket available, which is hence the name, I guess. Maybe there's a Golden Ticket to a different event that's up for grabs here. But in this case, this was won by Ryan Cohen, who was playing Thousand Suns in a Rubric Phalanx. This is the Rubric Marine focused detachment that has huge bonuses for Rubrics, as well as Scarab Occult Terminators. In this case, we are running a Demon Prince of Tzeentch with Arcane Thralls. This allows you to roll reroll battle shock checks for Rubric units within 9 inches. Largely, this is going to be there to fill points. It's only a 5-point enhancement. You don't often have to take battle shock checks on things like Rubric Marines or Scarab Occult Terminators, but it is a nice bonus, and if you have 5 points left in your list, you might as well take it. The Demon Prince of Tzeentch is important in this particular list because what we're going to be trying to do very often is use Revenge of the Rubric to counterattack enemies that destroy Psykers inside Rubric squads. This includes things like the Aspiring Sorcerers inside units like Scarab Occult Terminators or standard Rubric Marines, and allows you to shoot them back. However, because you often will have multiple sorcerers inside those units, thanks to the attached characters, things like Scarab Occult Terminators can lose their sorcerer without actually losing the -1 to wound effect that Scarab Occults get for having an attached character. That allows you to lose Psykers throughout the course of the game, use those Psykers to fuel your ability to attack back, and at the same time, any Psyker that dies nearby a Demon Prince will grant him a permanent cast bonus as he absorbs their soul. So he can act as a battery for your Kabbalistic rituals later on in the game, while you lose sorcerers naturally in the standard gameplay loop of this detachment. In addition to that, we have an Exalted Sorcerer on a Disc of Tzeentch, as well as a pair of Terminator sorcerers, one of them with Risen Rubric, which allows you to infiltrate one of your Rubric units. This includes either the Scarab Occult Terminators or up to 2 Rubric battle line units, so the normal Rubric Marines. We then also have another Terminator sorcerer with Lord of the Rubric. This gives +1 to hit. The nice thing here is that this is independent of your target and works on all attacks. So while the Terminator sorcerers do grant their unit +1 to hit against a specific enemy in the shooting phase, they do get kind of stuck in melee, and oftentimes you aren't going to be able to deal as much damage as you would expect in melee because they do intend to miss attacks quite a bit. Lord of the Rubric will allow you to assuage that and also split your fire between your heavy weapons and your lighter Inferno Bolters without having to worry about losing out on the hit bonus that you would get against a single target that the Terminator Sorcerer is normally giving you. From there, we have a total of 25 Rubric Marines. This is in 3 units of 5, as well as a larger unit of 10. All of these are equipped with Warp Flamers as well as Soul Reaper cannons on their heavy weapon carrier, and that large unit of 10 is largely an attachment slot for the Exalted Disc Sorcerer, who can make them difficult to shoot at, since he gives them an 18-inch lone operative. That allows you to do things like bring this unit out of reserve 18 inches away from the scariest enemy units with a rapid ingress. They're unable to target them, so you can just move on from there without taking any casualties and being much more cavalier with your position. It also allows you to play them out in the open in the early game, not having to hide behind terrain, because as long as you ensure that enemies can't move to within 18 inches of you, there's no way they can attack or interact with that unit. Now, interestingly, for the 10 model unit specifically, there are a couple of models equipped with Infernal Bolt Guns. I have to imagine that this is a concession to the fact that not the entire unit's always going to be getting into range to fire their Warp Flamers. Largely, your front line is going to be able to get in, but the back line might not, especially if you don't get good results on your Temporal Surges. So, for example, if you are going to be bringing these guys off of the table edge using Rapid Ingress, you can do so outside 18 inches of an enemy. They can't attack you. You then move up to just outside 12 inches, Temporal Surge to get your Flamers into range. That guarantees that the front line of Flamers are always going to be in range, and your Exalted Sorcerer is going to be in there as well. However, the rest of the unit might not be in, which allows you to continue to attack even if you have just Infernal Bolt Guns here because of their longer range from the Warp Flamers. From there, we also have 20 Scarab Occult Terminators. This is in 2 units of 5, as well as 1 big unit of 10. The nice thing about the Scarab Occult Terminators is that they do get all of those stacked sort of defensive mechanics that you can utilize inside this detachment. This includes your +1 saving throw against 1 damage attacks, as well as the ability to reduce incoming damage with Implacable Guardians. hits. And once you start to receive that damage, you can take that hit on the Scarab Occult Sorcerer inside the unit first, lose him, grant the Demon Prince his casting bonus for Kabbalistic Rituals, and then use Revenge of the Rubric to fire back at your enemy with all of those heavy weapons from your Soul Reaper Cannon and Hellfire Missile Rack equipped Terminators. The benefit here as well is that if you attach the Lord of the Rubric Sorcerer inside that unit, when you use Revenge of the Rubric, he's also going to benefit them with that +1 to hit. It's not restricted to any particular phase. It just works every time they make an attack. So even if they're counterattacking on your opponent's turn, they are also going to be getting that the +1 to hit bonus. They're going to be hitting on 2s. So nice little combo in there with this bigger unit, and then 2 smaller units that can benefit from the detachment abilities. And then we have a bunch of utility. That includes a Zangor unit, a Fatecaster Greatbow Zangor Enlightened unit, as well as 2 units of Infiltrating Sekitar robots. Since we do have a Risen Rubric in the army, which allows you to infiltrate either 2 of the Rubric Marine squads or 1 of the Scarab Occult Terminator bricks, having a lot of infiltrators in addition to that allows you to open up board space so you can play more of those guys up in relevant positions of the battlefield. Potentially even aggressive positions using the Exalted Sorcerer unit that can't be targeted outside 18 inches. You could even infiltrate them up into an aggressive spot where you ensure that your opponent can't move to within 18 of them. And even if they're out in the open in the middle of the table, they're going to be safe from enemy alpha strikes. Very interesting build. A lot of times we've been seeing this detachment using a focus on massive numbers of Scarab Occult Terminators. The downside of those Terminators is that they do tend to be kind of one note, and being kind of a single defensive stat line skew list, it does tend to run into some particular armies that are good at clearing it, and it can fall apart pretty quickly. I think the focus on a balanced composition of Rubric Marine squads that are good at skirmishing, plus the hammer blow of the Scarab Occult Terminators, does make a ton of sense. Now it's time to talk about a second Iron Man style of event, another event that used the 5 rounds in 1 day format, this one being the New Year's Iron Man GT. This one was won by Sean Bursick running Grey Knights, a horde of Grey Knight infantry running across the table at you from a Warpbane task force. This is the classic detachment that gives a bunch of rerolls. Now typically, we see this detachment focus obviously very heavily on Purifiers, which can project its hallowed ground aura to grant hit rerolls, as well as your larger anti-tank pieces, like things like your Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knights. However, this case, Sean said, we're not going to do that. Nemesis Dread Knights are too easy. I'm going to play nothing but infantry. In this case, we ran a single Brotherhood Librarian with Vortex of Doom. This guy's actually kind of nice because he's only 80 points, but he comes with an incredibly strong ranged attack, that being his D6 plus 3 shot, Strength 8 AP2, 2 damage Vortex of Doom. It only hits on 3s, but you are getting hit rerolls from the detachment ability, so it is very consistent. And for only 80 points for a single unit that can redeploy around the table to score you secondaries and isn't the easiest thing in the world to kill, thanks to his Terminator armor, he's actually quite a nice inclusion. From there, we also have Castellan Crow to go into a large Purifier squad and make it hit super duper hard. Everything else in this list is Grey Knight Power Armor Infantry, just Strike Marine profiles as far as the eye can see. A sea of 2+ armor save, toughness 4. This includes 3 strike squads. The nice thing here is that we have more, if we have more than one is obviously oftentimes going to be obsecking your home objective. The additional units are going to be able to deploy up aggressively and try to scout forward to get early game board control. They can, if they can reach an expansion objective from the top of the first turn, and you're going first, Grey Knights don't typically want to go first. They want to go second. They're much better in the second spot. However, with the Strike Marines able to reach mid-board objectives, they're able to obsec them early and then leave, which allows you to hallowed ground more aggressively if you're and force your opponent to come in and engage you on your terms, which is just beneficial because it gives you easier access to Hallowed Beacon and to your reactive effects. We have 3 Interceptor squads. These guys all equipped with Storm Bolters and Force Weapons. No heavy weapons in any of these units, the Strike Marines or the Interceptors. These guys are nice for being able to exchange control of objectives for your shooting phase. They're really fast. Obviously, a move 12 infantry is pretty solid, especially with the rerolls and the high damage output you can expect from Nemesis Force Weapons. The other benefit that they have is that they can recalculate level of control on objectives from the start of the shooting phase or the end of the movement phase by moving on to that objective, and then using their ability to move after shooting to then leave the objective. That retains control of the objective for the remainder of your shooting phase, which allows you to get hallowed ground in the center of the table for your shooting activations without actually giving up the intercessor squads to enemy shooting, which is kind of nice. In addition to that, they're also just really good utility because they're so fast on the table and difficult to kill. We, interestingly, have some actual range damage output from a trio of Purgation squads.
These equipped with psi cannons and silencers. There's 1 unit with silencers to clear lighter infantry, and then 2 units with psi cannons to add some additional anti-medium infantry shooting. The benefits here that we're talking about with the capacity to exchange level of control over the center of the battlefield allows the brigade squads to get the rerolls from Warping Task Force a little bit more easily while they're plowing away at your opponent's lighter infantry. These guys also have the ability to just teleport around the battlefield and clear out your opponent's screening units. Unfortunately, they don't have their indirect fire anymore that they did in the index version, but we can just use them to hop around the table and trade for enemy units without having to engage into melee. From there, we have 30 purifiers, just 3 units of 10, and that's the whole list. It's almost as many Grey Knight infantry as you can possibly play. And I imagine it plays incredibly aggressively. It does have the ability to clear out enemy screens early by just redeploying its brigade squads into annoying positions on the battlefield where you can clear out enemy light infantry. When you need to, you can use the interceptors to switch level of control in the center of the battlefield to give those brigade squads rerolls to trigger their silencer sustained hits or to get more psi cannon hits and try to clear out units that could screen your offensive push. Then, once you start getting units in play, you can use Hallowed Beacon to either drop purifier squads into annoying positions to charge enemy units 6 inches away, or you can start to trade on their objectives with the Strike Marine squads. I think there's another benefit that this army has in the Iron Man sort of style, which is that as an army that has very similar weapon profiles across the board, it's kind of easy to activate in a lot of cases. Basically, all your units are a single weapon profile, so their activations are very quick outside of explicitly the purifiers. The purifiers are, 1 unit is running a quadrant, a quartet of incinerators. The other units are just all running Nemesis Force weapons, so they're just all going to be hitting people. I imagine that the incinerator squad is for Castellan Crow to buff his shooting profiles. That's the only unit that's going to take multiple actual rolls to resolve, besides maybe the Stormbolters off the brigade squads. The rest of the army is just almost identical Nemesis Force weapon profiles. However, it's really awkward to kill. So your opponent basically has to fully activate into you to actually clear you out, which does make the game very difficult for them. Plus, they have to be on point about screening for the entirety of the game. And as a event format style that can be very grueling, it is very easy to forget some of the repositional capacity that Grey Knights have, and if you're not used to playing the matchup, you can actually falter and allow this army to get in and engage you in weird ways. The other benefit, too, is that it just has so much material to throw onto objectives. We have the Purifier squads that are 10 models apiece, so they're very good at sort of sweeping around and taking objectives. We have the Interceptor squads, who are very fast on the board, so they can apply some additional pressure to enemies that are within, say, 18 inches of them, with just their ability to move up and then charge them. And then we have the strike squads, which can put 10 OC by themselves onto an objective. And so as you're getting towards the later end of the game, being able to redeploy strike squads, Hallowed Beacon them next to purifiers, and then make 6-inch charges to just put 10 OC onto opponent's objectives allows you to constantly upkeep this pressure on them, where it's a horde of silver bodies that are running across the table and constantly knocking you off your expansion objective. All the while, those strike squads have purified their objectives on their own side of the table and secured them, so you're going to continue to score on your own end. And then if your opponent doesn't kill those strike squads that are charging into you by the end of their turn, you can obsect the objective back and continue to push forward. So I imagine once your opponent's screens are killed by Castellan Crow or by the interceptors or the progression squads, this army plays very aggressively and just tries to continuously keep you off balance. It basically caps outside of the psi cannons at strength 6, so it does have some problems with really high toughness characteristics. However, generally speaking, if you can keep your opponent off of their objectives, it doesn't really matter how much damage you're doing to them, because you're just going to beat them on victory points by the end of the game anyway. Very, very fascinating list, especially in the Iron Man format that we are playing in this case. And super cool to see some success from Grey Knights with a bizarre archetype. Now, moving on to one of the smaller events of the weekend, we have the New Year, New Grudge event. This was only a cap of 20 players. I think ended up playing with 16, but ended up with a single 5-0 undefeated and a really interesting build of Aeldari. Tyler Brennan took this event down with an Aeldari Seer Council. This is the Psyker-focused attachment that grants you free stratagems based on your roll of fate dice at the beginning of the game. Each result on the fate dice gives you 1 free use of that stratagem, which allows you to be incredibly command point efficient over the course of the game and use a lot of the detachment's reactive effects very often. Now, in this case, we are playing Asserman, Eldrad, a Farseer with the Torque of Morag Heg that allows you to command point tax one enemy stratagem per turn within 12 inches of the bearer. So it's a little different than a classic command point tax aura. It only works on a single activation per turn. It will work on both turns. So for example, if your opponent has an offensive stratagem, you can increase the use of that stratagem by 1 within 12. And if they have a defensive stratagem, you can increase the cost of that stratagem. But it can fizzle your opponent's stratagem usage potentially if you end up trying to use a stratagem and the Torque of Morag Heg would improve its cost to the point where you can't use it anymore. You actually just can't use the stratagem for that activation. As an army that tends to play very aggressively, as Seer Council tends to do, this enhancement is incredibly strong. We then have in addition to Azerman, just a ton of Phoenix Lords. We have Lycus, Jadezar, and Fuegan plus Azerman in here, in addition to 2 standard Warlocks. Now, those Warlocks are going to be hopping in with Warlock Conclaves and jumping into a pair of Storm Guardian units. These guys get the Serpent Scale platform, so we get our unit-wide 5+ invulnerable save, in addition to the -1 to wound that the Warlock Conclaves are going to be granting them. The Warlocks can dual attach with both the Warlock Conclave and the Farseers. That includes both Eldrad and the standard Farseer to create an incredibly big brick of 15 models that can stack your offensive buffs together. Now, the big benefit that this attachment has is the use of Unshrouded Truth. This allows you to redeploy your units in your own movement phase after you see how the secondary objective draws look. And so oftentimes what you'll see is these large bricks are going to be redeploying around the table and getting their fusion gun and flamers in range, in addition to the mass destructor shots that they get from the Warlocks themselves. And so these individual bricks are able to really sort of project a lot of force and clear out enemy infantry very effectively. The other benefit is that we get to redeploy Eldrad Ulthran around the battlefield. Because it's a movement phase reposition, it doesn't remove him from the battlefield to stop him from generating command points for you. So in addition to having up to 6 free stratagems over the course of the game, thanks to the detachment ability, you also get that CP from Eldrad as well, that he can doom enemies to give you +1 to wound against them. Now, from there, we do have a Dire Avenger unit in a Falcon for Azerman to hop into and just use the Falcon's fire support multiple times, because you're able to shoot and scoot in and out of the Falcon. You can also potentially use the Falcon to deliver some shooting units like Fire Dragons in addition. We have a Howling Banshee squad for Jadezar, the Fire Dragon unit that I mentioned for Fuegan, a Striking Scorpion unit for some early game movement blocking. What you want to do is be able to clear enemy screening units so they can't prevent you from using Unshrouded Truth to redeploy your big hammer units, in addition to the 2 Warlock Conclaves to join into the Storm Guardian squads, 2 units of Warp Spiders. One of those is equipped with a Power Blade array to attach Lycus into. The other one has just the standard range profile, and we have a Ranger squad for some additional objective holding. So oftentimes what this detachment will try to do is make use of the speed of Eldar. We have units like the Falcon that can push forward and disembark units up in the front. We have redeployments available from Unshrouded Truth units, as well as units that can just start in reserve and reserve in naturally to essentially alpha strike our opponent as hard as possible. From there, you can use Fate Inescapable to grant Ignore Cover and critical AP improvement. And then we have a ton of reactive effects that can protect those units on the crackback. That includes Forewarned, which gives you -1 to be hit and wounded on your infantry squads, Psychic Shield, which allows your infantry squads to get an 18-inch lone operative effect, as well as Isha's Fury, which is a reactive grenade effect. Enemies that move within 9 inches of a Psyker unit can suffer up to an average of 4 mortal wounds. And we have so many command points to use those with Eldrad plus all of the free stratagems you get from the detachment ability that in the early game, you're going to be able to use most of them. The hope is that you can absorb enough table space and kill enough of your opponent with that Alpha Strike that you're going to be able to roll things out from there. Absolutely fascinating build. I do think Seer Council is a little slept on. It is kind of matchup dependent, and it can go south pretty quickly because of how easy to kill a lot of these defensive profiles are. While you do have lots of stacked -1 wounds on things like the Warlock attached units, as well as the units using Forewarned to protect themselves, there is still the opportunity for infantry sweepers to clear out all your stuff if you don't Alpha Strike well enough. But in some cases, you can simply jail your opponent so hard with the ability to just be redeploying stuff into their face constantly that ends up being difficult to come back from that, especially when you're receiving damage from things like Fuegan, Fire Dragon bricks, Lycus improving your critical hits, and all of those being buffed by Eldrad's Doom altogether. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the DEF CON 2026 event, which actually had a draw in the finals, a natural draw between two Slaanesh armies, Slaanesh Demons, as well as Emperor's Children. Now, based on tiebreakers, the Emperor's Children ended up winning the event. This was Simon von Berlepsch, who won it with Coterie of the Conceited. Generally speaking, this is going to be kind of standard Coterie of the Conceited stuff. We've seen it a bunch of times before from Emperor's Children. This includes 3 winged demon princes, one of them with Pledge of Unholy Fortune to flip dice to 6s, one of them with Pledge to Eternal Servitude to respawn when killed, and the last one just no upgrades on him whatsoever. We then have 3 Lord Exultants as well as a pair of Lord Cacophonists to grant the sustained hits to their Noise Marine squads, which you can then improve with the enhanced criticals once your Coterie of the Conceited pledges are complete. Now, interestingly, we do have 3 Lord Exultants, but only 2 Infractor squads in the army. This allows us to attach 1 Lord Exultant to a Tormentor squad. The big benefit here is that it allows you to potentially infiltrate a Lord Exultant if you want to, but it also just gives you another use of a hard-hitting unit in the late game, whereas normally the Tormentors are not very dangerous. Attaching a Lord Exultant into them while he doesn't benefit from the rerolls of the Infractors is still a relatively dangerous piece. Whether you use them early to trade away for some additional pledge points against enemy utility units where you don't necessarily need a full Infractor squad to kill them, or you use him late game in order to use the enhanced attacks you get from having your pledge track completed in order to offset the lower damage output of that character versus Infractor squads. Either way, I think, is very viable depending on the matchup that you're playing. Now, from there, we also have a Chaos Spawn unit for utility, 3 Norse Marine squads, as well as 2 Chaos Rhinos to begin those Infractor units, give them Scout, and then replace them with the Noise Marines later on. Pretty classic Emperor's Children stuff. We cannot say quite the same about the second list in this particular event. At second place here, Martin Holtgren went undefeated with a Chaos Demon Legion of Excess. We've been talking quite a bit about Scintillating Legion over the last couple of weeks. However, the Chaos Demon win this week wasn't even using that detachment. Now, it's been quite a while since Legion of Excess was at the top of the metagame, almost a year since it was sort of taking things over at the beginning of last year. So for those who don't remember, this allows your Slaanesh units to fall back and charge, and when they charge, they can choose to forego their ability to fight first to instead get hit rerolls and wound rerolls of 1. This has actually been changed a couple times. On release, it gave you full hit and wound rerolls and ended up being way too strong. However, this more recent version does depower the detachment a little bit. Now, the stratagems for the detachment are also incredibly important. This includes things like Thief of Pain, which allows you to turn damage on your units into mortal wounds that you can then transfer over to other nearby units, as well as Archagonist, which could give you a +1 to wound effect, and Phantasmal Longing, which allows your Keepers of Secrets to move through walls. Speaking of Keepers of Secrets, that is the focus of this army, and their new and massively discounted points value that was updated in the last data slate update is starting to see some play, with only 240 points getting you an 18 wound, 4+ invulnerable save protected monster that has a permanent -1 to hit effect built in. Now, obviously, the downside of these Keepers of Secrets is that they don't hit particularly hard. Their strength characteristics are incredibly low, but if we do have command points to use that +1 to wound strat, and we are using our Seductive Gambit effect from the detachment ability, we can give them +1 to wound, so they wound basically any target on 4s or so and reroll 1s, which does help quite a bit. And against lighter units like infantry, the Keepers of Secrets are going to be fine. Now, from there, we also have Celesk, who oftentimes operates as just an independent character. It does have the ability to respawn when killed and is relatively beefy by itself. So sometimes sometimes they are just a independent unit, but we do have a bunch of demonettes that they could potentially jump into if they wanted to. They grant the demonettes improved critical wounds against essentially a toughness 4 or lower. If you're successfully wounding on 5s, those become criticals, which then become devastating, which can be helpful in some matchups, especially if you're fighting against enemies that have high save characteristics. However, it's oftentimes a mistake to expect a lot of damage out of your demonettes. However, on a baseline, they're relatively fast, fights first, and OC2, so they're actually just generally good at skirmishing over the middle of the table. We do have a Plague Bearer squad in here in the battle line as well to hold down the back line, in addition to those 2 demon Demonette units, as well as a pair of Torment Bringers. One of those Torment Bringers is playing the Dreaming Crown, which gives you +1 to hit for non-monster Slaanesh demons within 6 inches. And then we're also running the Mask of Slaanesh, which can give you a +1 to wound effect targeting an enemy within 6 inches of the mask itself, and -1 to wound from attacks generated by that enemy. The benefit here is that we can charge into a unit with, for example, Keepers of Secrets. We can run the Mask of Slaanesh up to within 6 inches and then apply her debuff to them. The Keepers of Secrets can give up their ability to fight first, which means they fight simultaneously with the unit that they've charged. So one of them will be attacked, and then the second one, or whatever other charging units are going into them, will be able to attack. And that -1 to wound effect will hopefully blunt a lot of the incoming damage. The Keepers of Secrets can be -1 to be hit and wounded in that case, and then be +1 to wound on the swing back. So hopefully the mask can construct situations where you can do much more damage than the relatively weak offensive profile that the Keepers of Secrets normally have would imply. Now, those Torment Bringers do have a pair of Hellflayers that they can actually attach onto. The Torment Bringer is the Herald of Slaanesh that's mounted on the big chariot, and the Hellflayers are the lighter version of that chariot. The benefit here is largely provided by the Hellflayer itself. The Hellflayers give +1 strength and damage characteristic to the entire unit when they make a charge move. That improves the Torment Bringer's lashes up to 6 damage 3 anti-infantry 3+ attacks, in addition to 8 2-damage devastating attacks. These can all benefit from the overlapping synergies you're getting from the detachment. This includes +1 AP from a nearby Keepers of Secret, as well as potentially +1 to wound, either from Artagonist or from the Mask of Slaanesh. So we can get a lot of these attacks, even not into infantry, to be relatively consistent, even into heavier targets like vehicles. And the Tormentbringer itself is giving +1 to hit to make all of them hit on 2s with the Dreaming Crown, at least the one of them that has that enhancement. So if they all combine together with the other auras that you're getting from the other demons, these things can do actually some incredible damage. And the Hellflayers as well act as a bank of additional wounds for the Tormentbringer itself. They're an additional 7 wounds on top of the Tormentbringer's already relatively impressive 12 wounds, and we can use Phantasmal Longing to move these things through walls instead of the Keepers of Secrets. The other benefit is that the Tormentbringers also project an aura of sustained hits to all Slaanesh demons within 6 inches, which can benefit the Keepers of Secrets themselves, who are also going to be attacking a pretty significant number of times with probably hit rerolls from the detachment ability. That sustained hits is going to go a pretty long way. Now, from there, we also have 3 units of Fiends to act as utility. These guys are relatively hard hitting. They have more devastating wound, 2 damage attacks that can be benefited by a lot of these overlapping synergies. So they're good against a lot of 2 wound profiles that demons otherwise are a little bit awkward at killing efficiently. Absolutely fascinating to see Slaanesh demons back being successful after so long. It's been almost a year since we saw this detachment do well, and it is cool to see it do well in this very unique composition, running all these chariots and these overlapping synergies, buffing the chariots. Nice to see. I think the Keeper of Secrets buff, and hopefully it does a lot to increase the diversity of demons being played, because I think previously other greater demons saw a lot more play, and the Keepers of Secrets profile was just not enough to compete with them, especially after it lost its Feel No Pain, so it wasn't really very tanky. And now with their efficient points cost and being very, very fast on the battlefield, I do think that there is something to be said for playing these things. But with that, those are all the best Armies Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to Foldforge for sponsoring the video. Check them out in the links in the video description. As well as thanks to everybody for supporting Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.